I go Eliza from my name. Growing up, my twin sister Anna's variation from night to day was like that also. She was the golden girl. I wasn't quite sure. Our mom was the classic housewife, devoted to her house and family, and pressing us to follow in her footsteps. Our dad, a strict university professor, had his life's work bound up in books and lectures. Being at home felt more like sitting through an endless critiquing session from as early as I can recall. My parents had a template for the ideal family, and it included no daughter who preferred to keep to herself and wore band t-shirts. My mother loved the remark, "Eliza, why can't you be more like your sister?" Usually she tossed it my way when I arrived at breakfast wearing headphones in order to block out the world. Anna, on the other hand, reveled in praise. Turning her immaculate hair over her shoulder, she would add, "I just don't get why it's so hard for you to put on a nice dress and smile more." She seemed to live on another planet. One very exhausting Saturday as our family got ready for one of Dad's faculty parties, a terrible snooze-fest, but a required attendance for us. I decided to resist in the tinniest way I knew how. I applied my darkest eyeliner at a pair of boots clearly below the required threshold. "You're not going out like that, are you?" Mom grabbed me on the steps, her eyes darting down to my footwear as though they were muddy. I gave a shrug, my usual response. "Don't find why not." She exhaled that long, drawn-out sigh, saying I was the biggest letdown in her perfectly arranged universe. "Please, Eliza, just this time can't you try to fit in?" "For what exactly? You can thus assume that we are the ideal family." Tired of the same old song and dance, I shot back. "It's not about passing for another. It's about respecting your father," she said, her voice sharp enough to convey business. Hearing the conversation, Anna came running down the hall with heels clicking on the hardwood like a judge approaching the bench. "Mom is right, Liz. It's not difficult to look decent. Why do you always have to complicate things?" Feeling my face flush, I said, "Maybe I don't want to be a clone of you, Anna. More than anything, I disliked feeling the odd one out in my own house. I despised these debates and hated being compared." Dad showed up at the bottom of the stairs, wrinkled brow. His voice was strong. "Eliza, go change right now. In 10 minutes we are departing." His voice did not allow any debate. He did not scream. He did not have to. His disappointment in his eyes was sufficient to send me marching back to my room to change my boots for plain flats and clean away half of my eyeliner. The car was silent save for the classical music Dad insisted on playing, as it was calming as we traveled to the celebration. I watched the window, the woods speeding past. I vowed to myself at that instant that someday I would live a life in which nobody could advise me on what to dress, how to behave, or who to be. I would be rid of these echoes someday. The only section of the house where I could imagine I was somewhere else, anywhere else, was my room. My room was mine, unlike the rest of the home full of my parents' decisions. Just 4 walls covered in music posters and sketches, yet it was my haven from the reality of my family's expectations. Dad knocked one evening as I was attempting to bury myself in a playlist of my favorite bands and marched into my room, his face set in a familiar grimace. "Eliza, down that noise level, and why haven't you worked with Anna today?" "You both have tests coming up," he remarked, his voice austere. Pulling out one earpiece, I gazed up at him, attempting to maintain even voice. "I have been studying. Not with Anna. I pick things better working alone." Dad shook his head, obviously not agreeing. "You are familiar with the guidelines. Your sister earns good marks. You ought to be following suit. Why you always have to complicate things is beyond me." "It's not about making things difficult," I remarked, mounting irritation. "I simply don't understand why I should do anything Anna suggests. Can't I study any way I want?" He switched his complaint instead of answering that. "And I saw you with those friends of yours yesterday in the cafe. They hardly seem to be a beneficial influence. You ought to be hanging around with my colleagues' daughters. They're more appropriate." my temper started to run hot. Fit for what? For your particular situation? Given their discussions of economics and their seeming enjoyment of those dull university events? Mom showed up at the doorway, her voice shrill as she joined in before he could respond. Eliza, your father makes accurate observations. From decent homes. The girls they act in a certain way. These are the sort of buddies you should aim for. Rising, I faced each of them. What if I object to friends selected for me? What if I want to pick my own companions, decide what I study, or even what I want to be? That's enough, Eliza, Mom murmured, her voice last. You know the university marks your future. Your father is assured of that, and you'll have to start considering settling down once you graduate. We had already gone over this. Settle down? The words floated like a life sentence. You mean start considering being someone's wife like Anna? Is that all you suppose I should be meant for? Mom's voice stayed strong even if her face softened just a little. We hope for your best. Traveling the road we have chosen will lead to a decent existence. A good life, I reiterated, the bitterness of irony in my mouth. Is it a good life if it's someone else's idea of great? Nobody replied that. They did not need to. We all realized that debating had no purpose. Like Anna, they had their ideas and expected me to fit in. Though always together, Anna and I were like two sides of the same coin, never on the same page. Dad taught at a university where the variations between us were even more clear. She was into business management, the golden child, usually nodding in lectures, asking intelligent questions that made professors nod gratefully. Me personally, I stayed in the same program, but it felt like wearing a shoe on the wrong foot. Awkward, unpleasant, and just plain wrong. Anna arrived one afternoon as I struggled across a stack of books in the library, her notes orderly and her grin ready. Hey, Liz, tonight you're going to the study group. Professor Hall noted he is dropping over. Could be excellent for us to show face, she replied, her tone light but firm. I looked up, weight of her expectations weighing in mind. No, I would not think so. You know, those are not exactly my scene. She wrinkled and set her books down with a thud that matched her disgust. It's not about it being your scene, Liz. It concerns leaving the correct impressions. You should start paying this some thought. We will be graduating not too far off. I shrugged and turned back to study. I am treating it seriously, just not in a way that makes me miserable. Why bother assuming? Because sometimes, Liz, you'd have to play the game to advance. You assume I enjoy all of this. She pointed around at her precisely tabbed notes and color-coded volumes. It has nothing to do with like. It's about acting out of need. I shook my head then, pushed back my chair with a scrape. Perhaps I'm bored with following everyone else's necessary behavior. Have you ever considered that? Her eyes were steel, but her voice softened. Liz, I'm only looking out for you. Dad's not around to permanently sort things out. If you keep alienating everyone, what are you going to do? Perhaps I will sort things out on my own. Feeling a burst of rebellion, I shot back, maybe not needing to follow Dad's route map, or yours. Anna sighed, her annoyance obvious. You really are rather stubborn. Just try okay. If not for yourself, for me. Show up tonight and talk to Professor Hall. It won't cause you to die. I turned to her, really looked at her, and saw not only my annoyingly perfect sister, but someone who truly cared in her own unique manner. Wonderful. I'll consider it. Not ready to promise more, I said. She said, thank you, her smile returning. You know, it's not quite horrible. If you give it a shot, you could even enjoy it. Doubt it, I whispered, but I knew this round I had lost. I would show there for Anna, sit through another dull conversation, and not at appropriate intervals. I reminded myself it was just a few hours. How horrible could it possibly be? As it happened, not as horrible as I had anticipated. When Professor Hall wasn't presenting from a platform, he was really fascinating. I even asked a question, and Anna gave a startled but delighted glance. Anna prodded me later when we returned to our dorm. Observe, not quite horrible, right? That brittle calm did not endure long, though. Anna first brought us to her fiancé, a lawyer 10 years her senior who was already well established and just what our parents had dreamed of in our last year. Overjoyed and applauding Anna for choosing such a wise match, Mom and Dad turned their expectant gaze straight on me. One evening over dinner, Dad stated, "Now, Eliza, it's your turn to find someone suitable," his voice suggesting that my time was running short. Mom nodded fervently, already sketching out my life as though it were another one of her orderly house projects. "Consider your future, sweetheart. Someone with strong status who can support you." I recall fixating on my dish and felt the walls closing in. Mom painstakingly arranged Anna's wedding down to the minute detail, from the bridesmaids' gowns to the floral arrangements, so highlighting her ideal view of family status. Mom visited Anna a lot after the wedding, giving advice and making sure her life turned out as she had planned. Seeing this, I knew one thing for sure. I wanted my life not shaped by the hands of another. One day, engrossed in ideas of how to flee the life my parents had planned for me, I was walking down the street when I heard the low rumble of a motorcycle approaching. Interest drew me toward the noise. I noticed Jake at that point. Pulling up next to me with his leather jacket and casual grin was him. "You look like you need a ride," he said across the engine's noise, a light-hearted glitter in his eyes. I stopped, looking back at the road home and then at his outstretched hand. What did I have to forfeit? "Sure, why not?" I said, sounding a mixture of anxiety and enthusiasm. Rising onto the rear of his bike, I experienced an adrenaline surge as we raced away. The wind whirled in my hair, and for the first time in a long time I laughed, realistically laughed. Jake yelled something about showing me his world, and I tightened myself, not wanting the moment to stop. We stopped at a diner bikers used often. Over burgers and fries, Jake spoke to me his life as a welder, his love of the wide road, and his passion for motorcycling. Raw and authentic, it was quite unlike anything I was accustomed to. "Do you not get terrified living like this?" My voice hardly above the din of plates and conversation around us, I asked. "Afraid? Not. Thrills abound here. One never knows what is ahead. Surely that's better than having everything scheduled for you," he answered, each word lighting his gaze. We met subtly over the next several weeks. Every ride Jake's motorcycle took me closer to the life I wanted and farther from the one I was meant to be living. The speed and the experience went beyond mere excitement. It was about experiencing life, freedom. Jake turned to me one evening as we watched the sunset from a remote viewpoint. "Eliza, I bike to escape, but more than that. I bike to live, to count every moment. Every moment seems valuable while you are around." My heart pounding rapidly, I leaned in toward him. "This is not like I have ever felt. You make me free, Jake." He grinned and drew me in. "Then let us not return to merely being. Let's live now." 6 months with Jake seemed like a lifetime of memories I had always dreamed about. My heart screamed a yes before my voice could utter the word on the day he proposed under the stars with the soft rumbling of his Harley in the background. Except for one towering obstacle. My parents. It was wonderful. I battled my anxiety about bringing Jake before them. He was everything they disapproved of. His wild energy, his humble but comfortable life as a welder, his sharp edges. But love gave me hope, and I felt it was time they knew. Jake was wearing his regular leather vest, black t-shirt, tattered trousers, and a bandana when I brought him home. About him, I admired that he was unreservedly self. As we ascended the driveway, I could already sense the weight of my parents' criticism. Mom's face became white when we entered upon Jake, her eyes widening in disbelief. "What in the world, Eliza?" Her voice just a whisper, she gasped. Dad's response was tougher, his words like blades. "Who is this, and why is he in our house, looking like a thug?" I inhaled deeply to help me to calm my nerves. "Mom, Dad, Jake here is you. I love the man he is. We are about to be married." Their quiet was unbounded. Then Dad turned to Jake, his voice full of contempt. "Marinated? Young man, what kind of living do you lead? What credentials do you possess?" Jake, bless him, he was relentless. "My line of work is welding. Following high school, I attended several specialist classes. I live an honest life and work hard." The expression on my parents' faces combined disbelief with terror. "Mom seems likely to pass out." "Oh, Eliza, a welder. One cannot be serious." Dad's voice grew louder, his fury blazing. "You are expecting us to bless this, to trash your future for a welder." I sensed my determination becoming harder. "Indeed, he makes me joyful and deserves credit. Is not that what ought to count?" "Still, the life you will lead," Mom began with a quivering voice. "It will be the life I choose," I shot back, my own voice gathering power. Dad shook his head, his choice obvious. "We neither want nor can support this. Should you choose him, you should not expect to be a member of this family." Though not his decision, the finality in his voice devastated my heart. Squeezing my hand, Jake gave me the will to face them. "Then I go for Jake. I will choose us. I decide upon my happiness." Dad's jaw tightened and Mom started crying. Dad remarked, his voice icy, "If you walk out with him, don't bother coming back." With Jake, my heart was a jumble of emotions. Pain, relief, excitement, and anxiety all blended into one as we left my parents' house. The evening air felt different, as every breath I took seemed to be a step into another world. For some time we rode in quiet, the only sound the motorbike under us producing constant roar. Jake looked to me, his countenance solemn, when we at last arrived at a little diner on the outskirts of town. "You definitely know about this, Eliza." "Really sure, you mean? After tonight there is no turning back," he added, eyes darting mine for any trace of uncertainty. Nodded and firmly squeezed his hand. "I am most certain of nothing else. Right now, being with you makes sense. It seems like what I should be doing." He grinned, the carefree, appealing smile that had captured me on our first day together. "Let's do it correctly, then all right. Let us start our life together." We came upon a peaceful booth in the corner of the diner. The waitress brought 2 coffees over without asking, and we sat there deciding what to do next. "What's first, then?" Stirring cream into my coffee, I asked and watched it swirl and mix. "We have to choose somewhere to live, at least temporarily, then possibly start looking for work," Jake said, his voice pragmatic but upbeat. "I have some friends who can help us get started." "It's going to be tough, isn't it?" I said, more of a comment than a query. The truth of what we were doing was starting to sink. Jake covered my hand across the table. "It might be, but we will deal with it together. Tough is nothing fresh for either of us, right?" I laughed, a brief, sharp surge of real pleasure. "Right, together." We stayed in that cafe discussing and organizing for hours. Every so often, Jake would toss out a notion that sounded so wild, so free, that my heart would leap. "Just you, myself, and the open road. Maybe one day we will save enough to travel that road trip across the nation." "I like that," I murmured, letting myself dream higher than I had ever ventured. Riding back into the city, we started looking. The following several weeks passed in a haze of activity. Though nothing extravagant, a tiny apartment on the outskirts of town was ours. I picked up shifts at a nearby diner, while Jake worked at a neighborhood mechanic. Though life was difficult, it was ours. We made do with what we had. Every night, when we returned home to see one another, it felt as though we had everything. Months later, we decided it was time to formalize it and married in a little private ceremony. I clung to a sliver of hope that my relatives would show up, that they would realize how delighted I was and let go of their preconceptions. The chairs set aside for them stayed empty, though, and no congrats arrived. The day was lovely as it was ours, even with the ache of their absence. I got rather close to Jake's mother over time. She greeted me with wide arms, naming me her daughter, therefore completing the void left by my own family. Her friendliness and acceptance helped some of the hurt resulting from my parents' rejection heal. Once Jake finished more diving instruction and earned his certification as an underwater welder, things were finally starting to look good for him and me. His salary jumped to $150,000 annually. That transformation made all the difference. We were able to purchase a townhouse in a decent neighborhood, the kind of property I had always wanted but never considered I would really live in. Working for Jake's company, I began as a dispatcher. It was more than simply work. It felt like I was helping the man I loved and laying groundwork for our future together. On weekends, we would ride his bike out of the city, speeding across twisting roads and savoring amazing vistas of landscape. Those were perfect times, the breeze in my hair and his warmth against my back. Living nearby, my mother-in-law started paying regular visits. She showed up one afternoon looking a little disturbed while Jake was experimenting in the garage and I was fixing us some coffee. She murmured, "There's been some ugly news," as she dropped down at the kitchen table. Something about a university professor engaged in a harassment scandal. My heart stopped briefly. "Oh, did they say whose it was?" Fearing the response, I attempted to keep my voice steady. She gave her head a shake. "No, on the radio they mentioned no name. However, you know how these things turn out. By now it most likely shows all over the TV." So I tuned into the news by flicking on the TV. Indeed, there was a scandal report, and as I had predicted, my father's face showed up on the TV. The anchor went into great detail accusing him, and I had a chilly sense of incredulity. I turned off the TV and sank down hard to try to sort the news. Wiping his hands on a rag, Jake entered and spotted my face. "What's wrong, sweetie?" His brow wrinkled in sympathy as he inquired. I sucked hard, my voice hardly a whisper. "It is my dad. He has been charged with stalking a student." Before Jake reached over and grabbed my hand, his face tightened momentarily. "I'm apologies, Eliza. That's difficult news. How you want to approach this?" "Not really sure of anything right now," I shook my head. "I have no idea. What can I really do after all? Not as we are now, close as not." Sensibly understanding, he gripped my hand. "I am here for you, anything you need. Right now, we don't have to work it all out." Before acting, I chose to wait and watch things develop. Knowing I would have Jake by my side, whatever choice I chose gave me the comfort I needed to face whatever happened next. Until that surprising afternoon, life had been quiet. A known automobile entered the parking lot at work. After not seeing my parents in a long time, the sight of them set out a range of feelings I had long put to rest. Both of them looked rather different. The crisis has worn out people. Mom looked years older and had dropped a lot of weight. Dad seemed broken, a shell of the strict man he once was. Seeing me, my mother hurried over, arms extended, like if nothing had occurred, as if years of alienation and rejection could be healed in a moment. Not now, though. I could embrace her. Rather, I backed off and grabbed Jake's hand in search of strength in his presence. Mom exclaimed, her voice breaking with emotion, "Eliza, it was so hard to find you." Ever the austere one, Dad cut right to the point, his voice sharp and nasty. "You know, I was falsely accused. When I visited your sister's husband seeking assistance, that bloodsucker sought a wealth instead. Your sister backed him, and today we have been kicked out. We depend on you." I looked at them, incredulity and wrath whirling inside of me. "Help? You turn up and expect help after all these years?" Mom said, "We have nowhere else to go," with desperation. "They have also disowned us too. We considered maybe staying with you." I almost found the ridiculousness funny. "Stay at my side. Once you turned away from me, you made it really plain that I was no longer your daughter. Dad's cheeks reddened as his old passion sprang out. You owe us, Eliza, after all we have done for you. That's where you're wrong, I said, sensing Jake squeeze my hand in encouragement. I owe nothing to you. I put my happiness over your requests, hence you kicked me out, and today you yearn for what? Just move in and act as though we are a family? The situation was escalating, and I could see people observing, a gathering starting to take shape. Mom began to cry. Her tears were loud and more likely to draw attention. Through her tears, "You're being unappreciative after everything we've done for you," she said. I breathed deeply, my choice obvious. Not, Mom. I am not undulating in thankfulness. I'm content and free. You made decisions, now you have to deal with them. I heard my dad screaming as we left, but Jake leaned over and softly ordered the security staff, "Don't let them come here again." Love and calm permeated the next months, which sped by. A son arrived, a fresh start for our expanding family. Neither did my parents ever return. That day in the parking lot was the last I saw of them. Although part of me laments what may have been, I knew I had chosen the best course of action for my family and myself.